Hello, welcome. In a previous video, I talked about the definitions of sine, cosine, tangent. I talked about the reciprocals, cosecant, secant, and cotangent, and the relation between them. I can't stress this enough. It's super important that you memorize these, you use the acronym SOHCAHTOA, you understand the relation between the reciprocals and the triangles and say that again. Super important that you understand the three trig functions and the reciprocals and the relations between them. I find that students who know this and have a good handle on this are able to be successful further on in the unit, and students who do not have this like that on the back of their hand, they struggle. And so I'm really encouraging you, make some flashcards, do what you got to do, commit this information to your head. All right, so let's take a look. Calculator. Here on out, anytime you grab your calculator to put an angle in, it's important that you go to your calculator and you make sure to check that what mode you're in. So if you enter an angle, you need to check your mode. There's two modes. There's either degrees or there's radians. So right now we're working with degrees. You can see that 29.7, 48, 78 degrees. So go ahead, check your calculator and see if it's in degree mode. If it is, then go ahead and type in tangent of 29.7. Your calculator will give you 0.5704. What does this mean? What does this number tell you? Well, this number tells you that if you have a right triangle, and if you have a 29.7 degree angle, then the opposite side divided by the adjacent side is going to give you this ratio. That's all that the calculator is telling you. All right, so let's take a look at the next one, secant of 48. Now, if your calculator is like most of them, you won't find a secant button. It's rather unfortunate, but you're okay. You remember what secant is, don't you? Okay, if you don't, make sure to study. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So we may not be able to find secant, but we can find cosine of 48. Cosine of 48, you can type into your calculator and get 0.6691. Okay, well, that's fine, but how do I find cosine then? Sorry, how do I find secant of 48? Well, remember, these are reciprocals of each other, and to find a reciprocal, we can do 1 divided by that number. So here I could take 1 divided by 0.6691, and that will give me the secant of 48. So 1 divided by 0.6691, we get 1.4945. 1.4945. All right. Cosecant. How do we find cosecant of 78? Pause it. Try it on your own. Cosecant, you see, is the reciprocal of sine. And so here, I need to find 1 divided by sine of 78 degrees. And when you do that, you'll get your final ratio of 1.0223. All right, so now we are going to move on to inverses. And inverses are different than reciprocals. Okay, these words maybe seem similar, but they are very different. Reciprocal, flip the fraction. Okay, think 2/3, 3/2. Inverses, think opposites. Okay, so if I type in my calculator cosine of 25 degrees, you'll see that you get 0.9063. But what if I know the ratio and I want to go backwards and figure out what the angle is. That's the idea of an inverse, right? Start with the ratio, go back to the inverse. Well, here, if I take a triangle who has a ratio of 0.9063, and I want to know the angle, I need to use the cosine button on my calculator. This was a typo, so your copy of the notes may be different than that, but that's what it should be. If you type this in, your calculator is going to give you an answer of 25. It won't say degrees, but you need to know that. So the inverse takes a ratio, input, in this case cosine, it's the ratio of the adjacent over the hypotenuse, and it's going to return an output of an angle. So if you look here, the sine of 66.2 degrees, if you put it in your calculator, you'll find a 0.91496. So the ratio of the right triangle of the opposite side over the hypotenuse is 0.9146. The inverse sine, hit second sine button to get that. Of that ratio, it's going to tell you the angle, which, surprise, surprise, 66.2 degrees. Tangent of 86 degrees, that's going to give you 14.3 as the ratio. If we do inverse tangent, it's going to give me the angle of 86 degrees. And so that is the difference between inverses and reciprocals. Reciprocals, we're still always putting angles in, and we're always getting ratios out. But with the reciprocals, we're just flipping the fraction, or in this case, flipping the decimal. Inverses, though, instead of putting in an angle and getting a ratio, we're putting in a ratio and getting an angle. All right, so calculators. How do we do this? I've kind of talked it through a little bit, but this first one, I think I do want to show you this. I think sometimes it's helpful to see this. If I said solve this equation, I think a lot of students' initial reaction is to try to divide by sine here and say somehow this. But the issue is sine isn't multiplying. Sine's a function. Sine is saying take the opposite side over the hypotenuse. That's what this means. And so you can't just divide. This doesn't work. Bad, bad, bad. All right, so what are we going to do? How do we get around this? Well, the key is we have to take the inverse of each side. So I take the inverse of the left and the inverse of the right. Inverse sine of theta is going to cancel out. It does the opposite, right? And that leaves me with the inverse sine of 0.7456. Type that in your calculator, inverse sine of 0.7456, and we get an angle of 48.2 degrees. All right, let's take a look over here. Cotangent. Now, you'll notice we don't have an inverse cotangent button. If we did, that would be handy. But since we don't, we need to change it and work with tangent. Well, I don't know straight off what tangent is, but I know, going back to our definition, what's the relationship between tangent and cotangent? Hopefully remembering they're reciprocals. This 1 over means reciprocal. So tangent theta means 1 over 1.2345. So we know this is true, and now we can solve. We can use inverse tangent of each side to remove the tangent. We're then left with theta equals the inverse tangent of 1 over 1.2345. This will give me the angle whose tangent is 1 over 1.25. Type that in the calculator, and we should get 39.0 degrees. Go ahead and pause it. Try this last one on your own. Okay. Well, we don't have a secant, inverse secant button, so we have to work with cosine. What do we know about cosine? It's 1 over 1.9228. We then want to get rid of this cosine, so I'm going to do the inverse cosine of both sides. That then tells me that theta equals inverse cosine, the angle whose cosine is 1.9228. Type that in the calculator and we get 58.7 degrees. All right, let's do a quick review. So memorize, learn, know the definitions of the three trig functions and their reciprocals. Super important. Typing it in your calculator, type it in as an angle. It's going to tell you the ratio of the opposite over adjacent side for tangent. Secant, most calculators don't have a secant button, so we have to define cosine instead, and then take the reciprocal, 1 over that number. Cosecant is 1 over the sine of that angle, which gives me this. Reciprocals are different than inverses. Inverses undoes, or is the opposite of taking an angle and getting a ratio. It takes a ratio and gives an angle. And then finally, using our calculator, if we have sine of an angle, to find the angle, we need to use inverse sine of the ratio. Same thing here with cotangent. We have to change it to tangent first by doing the reciprocal, and then doing the inverse tangent of that ratio to get the angle. Thanks for watching.